Hey, good morning. Today's daf is daf ayin in Masechet Chullin. We are at the bottom of Samach Tet Mabet. We are at the Gemara. So let me share my screen and we will get started. So here we go. So we are still in the fourth chapter of Chullin after discussing the case of Ben Pekua, the fetus of a slaughtered mother, which is edible without being separately slaughtered. We saw in the Mishnah on Samach Tet Amud certain rules regarding a mother animal that is having a difficult first childbirth. If born successfully, this firstborn animal will be subject to the laws of Bechor, meaning that it will need to be given to a Kohen, who must then offer it as a sacrifice if it is unblemished, and if it's blemished, then he can just eat it. But in any event, the owner has no right to benefit. If, for example, it were to drop dead, the cadaver the carcass would need to be buried. And so in our Mishnah, we noted two possible situations. The difficulty of the childbirth has led to the baby animal not being born successfully. So the Mishnah first noted, and the Mishnah noted two possible outcomes with a major difference between them. So if the fetus is cut up as each limb comes out, there was never a full birth. So the baby never attained the sanctified status of a firstborn animal. And one can therefore benefit from the limbs that are cut up like a nevela. Therefore, it can be given to dogs. On the other hand, if, however, the fetus is mostly delivered before one starts cutting it, then it has attained the sanctified status of a firstborn animal, so one may not benefit from the limbs. They must be buried. In either case, however, the mother is considered to have given birth because at some point, a majority of the animal went through has left has gone through the birth canal. And so as a result, the mother is considered to have given birth. And so any future child will not attain Bechor status. So now, as we pick up with the Gemara, the question arises whether there is anything that can be done once birth begins. So Itmar, Yotza Shlish, it was said that if the fetus already has emerged 1/3, Umcharola Obikochavim, and now the sale happens to a non-Jew. So the Chazar v'Yotza Shlish Acher, and the next third comes out. So Rav Huna Omar Kadosh. Rav Huna says that the baby is sanctified as a Bechor, and therefore the sale is not valid because it needs to be given to a Kohen. And Rabba Amar Eino Kadosh. Rabba says, no, the sale was valid. It is partially owned by a non-Jew prior to childbirth, and therefore it's not going to be subject to the law of Bechor. Because one of the important rules associated with Bechor is that when there is non-Jewish partial ownership of the mother or the fetus, meaning the mother, as a result of the ownership of the mother, you can have ownership of the fetus, or directly in the fetus, as we're dealing with here, the law of Bechor does not apply. So the question is so how do we understand this case where 1/3 was born before the sale and 1/3 was born after the sale? And so Rav Huna and Rabbah explain their positions. Rav Huna Amar Kadosh, Rav Huna says that the baby is a Bechor, Kasavar Lemafreya Kadosh, because he understands that everything happens retroactively. The Kevan de Nafakle Rube, and once the majority of the animal has come out, Iglai Milsa, everything is revealed. Lemafreya, that retroactively to me, Kara Havakadosh, that from the very beginning of its childbirth, it was a Bechor. Umay de Zabin, lo klum Zabin. And so when the sale happened, there was nothing to sell because it didn't belong to him. It needed to belong to the Kohen. As we'll take a look at Rashi.
What did he sell? Did he sell the mother? Knowing the mother was pregnant, or did he sell not knowing she was pregnant, or did it matter?
It doesn't. Well, Not neither of what you said. Here we're dealing with obviously the person knew that the mother was pregnant and was trying to escape the laws of Bechor. And indeed, today in modern day, Jewish farmers sell an interest in the mother well ahead of time so that they are not subject to the law of Bechor, because otherwise there would be a lot of Bechor animals around, and that would make things very difficult because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. And so that's how we deal with it. But here, the sale did not happen of the infant, of the newborn animal, until one third had emerged. And so, according to Rav Huna, we look at everything retroactively, as Rashi tells us, 6 lines up, middle of the line from the bottom of Rashi. Lemafreyahu kadosh. Avagav de beleda talamil rachmana. That even though that everybody agrees that when it comes to whether or not an animal is a bechor, it depends on the childbirth. Meaning, if the child is born, as we will see, by a C-section, everybody agrees that that's not a bechor, and so that you need to have a childbirth. Uberova huda havyaleda, and everybody agrees that you need to have a majority of the childbirth. Mihu, but what is distinguished, and this is the position of Rav Huna, kinafik ruba, when a majority has come out, mashvile leda mitchila. Now it's clear that the birth began at the very initial instant. The aglai milsa, and everything is revealed. The kizavin laovikochavim, that when he sold the interest in this fetus, the 2/3 of which had not yet come out, but 1/3 had come out. Lav klum zavin, he didn't sell anything. De'ein lo chelik bo, because he, the owner, had no interest because it now belonged to the Kohanim. And so as a result, that is the position of Rav Huna, and that is why it is kadosh. And Rabba Amar Eino Kadosh. Rabba says, back into the Gemara, he says that it is not kadosh. And now we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from the narrow lines of the Gemara, and Kasavar, and we get the explanation for Rabba. He thinks Mikanu Labba Kadosh, that when you have the majority birth, it's only going to be sanctified from the point at which the majority emerges. Umay de Zabin, Shaper Zabin. And so as a result, what he sold was a good sale. As Rashi tells us, next Rashi, Mikanu Labba, 5 lines up near the end of the line, Mikanu Labba, Mietzias Rove, from the majority going out. The Elach, and that point on, Hu Kadosh. That's when it becomes holy. Ubetchilas Leda, so. At the beginning of the childbirth, Chullin Hava, it is a non-sanctified animal. V'yachol makro, and so as a result, you can sell it. Ki'iluhu b'mei imo, just as you could sell it when it was inside its mother completely. Sharei kedusha so taloi beleda, because after all, the kedusha, the holiness of this, as the status of a bechor, depends on the childbirth. The keva de mechira, so because he sold it before the childbirth had been finished, mechira havalei yad ovid kochavim be'emsa. So now all of a sudden there's a non-Jew that owns a piece. Vesulo kaddish, and so as a result, the animal doesn't become sanctified. Bebeis shlishi hachronim, when the last 2/3 of the animal are born, and so as a result, that is the dispute between Rav Huna and Rabbah.
So according to Rabbah, what happens in the future if this mother gave birth and she was a petach rechem? So the next child, is that child considered a bechor or not? Because according to Rabbah, it seems like this is not a bechor, but then she has another birth later. But how can that be a bechor?
No, you're absolutely right. That would not be a bechor either. There would be no bechor any longer for this animal. It's just like if the firstborn animal comes out with a C-section. The next one does not, even if it's a vaginal birth afterwards, it's not going to be. That's not going to change the status and make it require a pidyon. So
this one would never have a bechor. This mother could never have a bechor.
Correct. That's exactly right. This mother could never have a bechor. Just like the case of our Mishnah, where the fetus was cut up as it came out of the mother. That animal also will never have a bechor. So now back into the Gemara, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up in the from the narrow lines of the Gemara, middle of the line. They all go according to the reasoning, meaning Rav Huna and Rabbah have a machlokas elsewhere where their rationale is the same. The Itmar, Yatza Shlish Derech Dofin. If 1/3 comes out via a C-section, Ushnei Shlishei Derech a rechem, and the other 2/3 come out via the womb. So it must be a terrible birth for the mother. But in any event, Rav Huna Amar Eino Kadosh. It is not considered sanctified because and we'll see exactly why in a moment. Rabbah Amar Kadosh, whereas Rabbah says no. In that case, it is holy. It does have the status of Bechor. Rav Huna Amar Eino Kadosh. Rav Huna L'Tamei de Amar L'Mafreya Kadosh. Veruba Kama Lesi Berechem. Well, take a look. Again, Rav Huna says that you think everything is retroactive. And when did you have a majority of birth? Well, 51% or 50.0001% of the birth. When that happened, a majority was not via the womb. It was a C-section because 1/3, it really could even be 26%, but one third was via C-section. And so now that majority was not via the womb, and so the animal never gets sanctified as a Bechor. Whereas Rabbah says, Amar Kadosh, Rabbah L'Tamei, Damar Mikanu Laba Kadosh. What matters is what is the 50.01% aspect of the birth. So for him, as long as the first under 50% or under, or even equal to 50% was C-section, if the next bit was via the womb, was a regular birth, well then it would be, and the rest of it would be via the womb, it would be totally fine. Veruba derech rechem nafik. In the end of this birth, the majority is via the womb. And so as a result, as soon as you have the majority being via the womb and never a majority not being via the womb, it's going to be considered kadosh. Utsricha. And you know what? We need to have both machlokot. We need both the machlokas in connection with the sale, where Rav Huna says it's kadosh and Rabbah says it's not. And we need to have the machlokas in connection with the C-section, where Rav Huna says it's not kadosh and Rabbah says it is. Why? If we only had the rule in connection with the sale to the non-Jew, Bahakam Rav Huna, it would make sense that Rav Huna would only say his statement in that situation. Mishum dilakula, because if he and Rashi explains that although it says Mishum dilakula, which literally means because it would be a leniency, what the Gemara means is, take a look at the last Rashi on the dap, Kolomer Di'i Amar Mikanu Laba, if he changed his position and said that from this point on it would be holy, Kulahu, it would be lenient. Because it would result, as Rabbah ruled, that there would not be Kedusha. Aval b'hachta lechumra. But in the case of saying that in the second case, in the case of the C-section, we're now saying that that the animal is kadosh from this point forward would be stricter and result in it being a bechor, as Rabbah says. Ema modi leila Rabbah. Maybe Rav Huna would agree with Rabbah. And so as a result, we definitely, from Rav Huna's perspective, need to teach both cases. V'i itmar baha, and if you were to tell me in the other case, baha ka'amar, that again, if you were to just tell me about the C-section case, baha ka'amar Rabbah, maybe Rabbah would only say that it's kadosh in that case and focus on this point forward, because again, that's going to be strict, as Rashi tells us. Baha ka'amar Rabbah, top Rashi on Ayin Amud Aleph, as we are now at the top of Ayin Amud Aleph. Mikan ula ba, that he focuses on this point forward. De'i amar l'mafreya, because if you were to say it's retroactive, kulahu delo kaddish. If you were to focus on that, maybe that's why in the C-section case, Rabbah says let's focus on the future. But aval baha, but in the other case, namely in the sale case, Ema modile Rav Huna. Maybe he would agree with Rav Huna that you need to be strict and say that it's kadosh and that we focus on limafreya in the sale case in order to have it be kadosh. So tzricha, we need to have both disputes. That is the end of that discussion. Okay, well, not quite the end of the discussion because now we are going to ask a question from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah seems to say that you can cut off each limb as it emerges and throw it to the dogs. And so we're going to try and give it an explanation that seems to potentially be inconsistent with Rav Huna. So Tanan, hamivakeres hamakasha leiled, if you have this animal that's giving its birth to its first child and is having difficulty with the labor, you can cut off each limb and throw it to the dogs, implying that there's no status of a bechor to those limbs. So my lav machatach umeniach. Isn't this presumably a case of you're not throwing each limb to the dogs as it comes out, as it gets cut? You're presumably creating a pile and then throwing it all to the dogs. V'i amrat lemafreya hu kadosh. But if you say, as Rav Huna says, that we're going to focus on everything retroactively, you cover mi boile. You should need to bury it. You shouldn't be able to benefit at all. As Rashi tells us, mitoch machatech umeniach, a second line in Rashi on Ayin Amud Aleph, Ad Sheyetze Harov, that if you're going to leave each piece until a majority has come out, V'aval Gav Sheyatza Harov, even though a majority has come out, V'harei Achatichok Lefanenu, and even though the pieces are in front of us, our Mishnah tells us, Mashlich Lo L'Klavim, you can send it to the dogs. Now, I Amra Bishlama, if you say it will make sense, Mikanu Labahu Kadosh, if you hold like Rabbah that focuses on the moment of a majority, that's when you get the Kadosh status and we don't look retroactively. So, Mikame Yitzias Rov, Lo Kadosh Midi. When the majority has come out, there is nothing to sanctify. Hanach. Because it's all been cut up beforehand. And so as a result, there is no live animal to say is sanctified. So lo chala kedusha laihu. So that according to Rabbah, there's no sanctity that will go on it. And so as a result, even if you let all these pieces pile up, it will still be able to be thrown to the dogs. But Ella, I amrat lemafreya to lemafreya, and we're now in the second line of Rashi on Ayin Amud Aleph. But if you were to say, second narrow line of Rashi on Ayin Amud Aleph, but if you were to say that everything is retroactive, as Rav Huna says, the lemafreya hu kadosh, that it's all kadosh, that the newborn infant animal behema is going to be holy lemafreya retroactively from the beginning of its birth. Hakevan deruba kaman. Most of that animal is now in front of us. Iglai milsa b'yitzias harov. So we see that a majority has come out. Demi kara kadoshlu. So as a result, it should be holy from the point of the first little bit that came out of the animal, and therefore the first aspect of childbirth. And so as a result, the animal should be holy, and therefore when you have a majority of the pieces and right in front of you, you should not be able to throw them to the dogs. So doesn't this show that Rav Huna can't be right? No, not necessarily. No, we're talking about a situation where every time you cut, you throw that piece to the dogs. And Rashi explains, well, why then don't you, even if you throw it to the dogs, you still have a majority that's out of the animal, so why don't we look retroactively? The kaven de leisnahu. Well, then it gets eaten by those dogs. And so because it no longer exists, amai techol b'shas gemar yitzias harov. It won't become holy at the time that the majority comes out. V'suruleka. And so as a result, there will never be a time when it's prohibited. Daha kishada kama chulin hava. Because when that piece was thrown to the dogs, it was still chulin. It was not yet kadosh. Aval biyatza shlish. But when we had the case of 1/3 come out, umachrolo v'kochavim, and then it gets sold to the non-Jew, v'chazav biyatza shlish, and now another third comes out, acher, a different third comes out, v'kulan lefanenu. All of it is in front of it. So in that situation, ikala memar aglai milsa, v'chayla lemafreya umivat lemachira. That's where we would say that we nullify the sale, and because it all gets revealed that it was kadosh from the very beginning of the childbirth. But when we don't have all the pieces in front of us, because they were thrown to the dogs one by one and therefore eaten and consumed by the dogs, and therefore they're not in front of us. We never have a moment when we see a majority of the animal born, and therefore we never have a moment where we say, "Oh, iglay milsa," and retroactively it becomes kadosh. And so as a result, that's the story. And so Rav Huna is consistent with our Mishnah. Okay.
How are you learning this? I'm a little confused. Rashi is the kevan the litnehu amai techol. Isn't techol referring to chulin? The word techol. B'shat gemar yitziat rov.
It's.
I mean, I thought you were saying that it was.
I
Why would it be
think
called
that
kadosh?
this techol is chal, not chulin. So why will it apply to, as opposed to why would it be chulin? So I don't. I think you're right that those words have similar letters, but I don't think that this techol is referring to chulin, but rather chal, like
Right. I know what the word. I know the word,
so
but
so
it just looked, wasn't sure when you.
yeah, I mean, that's the way
Okay, could
I
be. All
understood
right.
it. Okay, so now the Gemara points out, though, if in fact we're saying what we're saying, then what's the implication? So let's take a look. We're back into the Gemara. We're at Aval Machatech. That is um, the last word on the sixth line. So aval machatech umeniach. But what would be the law if in fact you did not throw each piece as it came out and was cut off to the dogs? You cover. You would have to bury it. Well, 1 second. Adatana Seifa, but 1 second, when we learned this, the end of our Mishnah, what did we say? Yatsa Rubo, that if a majority comes up, you kaver, and then you do the cutting. You kaver, you have to bury it. V'niftara mina bechora, and it's going to be exempt from the mother is no longer going to have any more bechors. So liflog v'litnei b'didei. But why not teach the following case? Bamed dvar mamurim. When do we say that you can throw each piece to the dog? That's when you cut each piece and you throw each piece individually. But we should just clarify that when you were to cut each piece and leave it all together, then you would have to bury it. No, Hakinami Kamar. The Gemara responds, no, you're misunderstanding what our Mishnah is trying to say, and our Mishnah is trying to say that exact point. But when is it true that you can do the cutting the way we said and throw it to the dogs? That's when you cut and you throw. But if you were to cut and leave all the pieces and allow them to accumulate until you have a majority, it's as if Kamisha Yatza Ruba Kabir. It's as if it's the majority that emerged at one time, and therefore the fetus must be buried. And so actually our Mishnah is saying that, and in fact it is consistent with Rav Huna as well. And so as a result, our Mishnah is not a proof either to Rav Huna or to Rabbah. Okay, so now the Gemara wonders whether the Mishnah is taking a position on whether we follow the majority regarding limbs. We know that we're going to follow the majority regarding the entire animal with respect to childbirth, but do we say that we also will follow the majority with respect to limbs? And exactly what do we mean by when we ask that question? So by Rava, halchu be'evarin achar harov. Oh, lo halchu be'evarin achar harov. Do we follow the majority with respect to limbs or not? So Hechidami, what exactly are you asking, Rava? So, Elema, if you want to say that Rav is asking the following, Kagon Shiyatza Rov B'miut Aver, that you have a majority of the animal come out, but the last little bit of that majority was a minority of a limb. And so our question is the following. V'kami Baile, and so Rava's question is the following. Hi miut devarai. This last piece that came outside, that is a minority of a limb, basa rov de aver shadinan lay, do we follow the majority of that limb, which is still inside, and therefore say we pretend as if that limb, that the minority limb, did not come out of the animal, and therefore the animal has not yet had a majority of childbirth? Obasa ruba de ubar shardinan lay. Or do we say no? The majority of the entire fetus has come out as a result of this partial limb, this minority of a limb, and therefore we're going to treat this as part of that majority, and the animal has had a childbirth. And so as a result, which is that our question? No, that cannot be our question, the Gemara says, because Pshita deloshav kinan ruba de ubar ba'azlinan basarov aver. We're not going to abandon the majority of the animal and say, don't follow the majority of the animal, follow the majority of the limb. That sounds pretty silly. Meaning, when you have a choice as whether to follow this partial limb, this minority of a limb, should follow the rest of the animal or the rest of that limb, the majority of the animal takes precedence.
But isn't we talking about? Isn't the animal still inside most of the animal?
No. This case, right? The case that we're asking about is a majority of the animal has come out, but the last piece of that majority. So again, imagine that you have half the animal outside and half the animal inside, and the last little bit that got you to 51% was a piece of the leg, just like maybe you now have a majority of the you have a significant part of the core of the animal. The what would be what's the word for the non-legs part of the
the corpus, the corpus.
Yeah, the corpus of the animal. But now out comes part of one of its front legs or one of its back legs. And so now all of a sudden that little bit extra of that leg made it so that a majority of the animal is now out. But the question is, do we say that, well, look, this little bit that came out is a minority of this limb. So this minority of this limb needs to follow the majority of the limb. And the majority of the limb is still not born yet. And so as a result, this animal is not yet, has not yet had a full childbirth.
That was just said that the description you gave showed that 50% of the animal is out. Now you get a little bit more. That makes it more than 50% of the animal. It should be obvious that now we have more than 50% of the animal outside the body.
Yes, that is correct. And that's exactly what the Gemara concludes. But the question that the Gemara was asking is, what if that 1% that took you from 50% to 51% was a minority of a limb? So it was just part of the arm, and maybe even a very small part of the arm. And so do we say, no, don't say that now 51% of the animal is out. Say 50% of the animal is out, and this 1% must be ignored because a majority of that limb is still inside. And of course, the answer is, that's ridiculous. We're going to follow the majority of the animal. We're not going to follow the majority of a limb. And so Ella, so as a result, that can't be Rava's question. Ella kagon sheyatsa chetzio barov aver. No, it's exactly half. And you know what? What got you to exactly 50% was a majority of the leg. So the kamiboile. And so the question is the following: Hahu miut debagavai, the minority that is still inside the womb of that leg. Mi mahu lemishtiye basar rov aver. Do we say that it follows the majority of the limb? And so since a majority of the limb is now out of the animal, we'll look at that rest of that limb and pretend that it is also out of the animal. And as a result of including that partial, the minority of the limb that's still inside of the animal and treating it as if it's outside the animal, now we get to 51%. And so as a result, we treat the animal as if it's been born. So Tashma, okay, let's see if I can prove.
But in that case that you described now, that 50%, the animal is not out for over 50%, even with that limb.
No. With the majority of the limb, it's exactly 50%. But if you were to add the minority of the limb that is still inside the animal, now all of a sudden you'd be over 50%.
Right, but that small piece is still inside the animal, right?
Correct. 100%.
So the
And the
animal,
question
so a 51% of the animal is not outside the body.
that is correct. And what the Gemara is asking and what Rava is asking, what we're understanding Rava's question to be, is if that, do we allow the minority in that case to follow of the limb to follow the majority of the limb and thereby treat it as if it's a majority out? Now, the
Sounds
answer is
like a larger question, Devar Shaloba Olam, in a
well,
sense. Not exactly,
I
but
hear that, but I would argue that we know that it exists, and therefore it's not really a davar shelo bala olam. So, in any event, Tashma, we're going to try and bring a proof from our Mishnah. Yatsa rubo harei yikaver. We said that if a majority comes out, you have to bury it. So, my rubo, ilemo rubo mamish. If you're going to tell me that what we mean by most of the animal comes out is a literal majority, Ad hashda lo ashmeina deruba kakulo. We have throughout Shas all these places where we know that a majority is like the entirety. So if you don't need to teach me the fact that if a majority has come out, we treat it as if the baby is born. No, maybe what it's really telling you, the fact that it's saying it is telling you that if exactly 50% came out, and the majority of a limb is part of that 50%, well, then we will treat the minority of the limb as if it has also come out. And so, isn't that a proof to give us the answer to this question? And the answer is low. No, it is not a proof. Kagon sheyatsa rubo b'miyud aver. No, we could say that that is dealing with a case where a majority came out with a minority limb. So we have 51%, but in order to get to 51%, you have to include a small piece of a limb that a majority is still inside, the Kamash Milan, and it's coming to teach us exactly what we thought was obvious a few moments ago. Delo shavkin rubo de uber de behema ba'azlina basar aver, and that we don't we don't ignore the majority of the animal and say that a limb will follow the limb itself and will follow the majority of the limb. No, we follow the majority of what comes out. And so the bottom line is we do not answer this question. It is left unanswered, and so as a result, it seems like you would need to have 50%, 50 plus percent come out in order for a birth to be considered a real birth.
50 plus percent of the animal.
Correct. 50% plus of the fetus. That's exactly right. So, boy, Rava, now we're going to have a number of questions that all relate to some kind of chatzitza separation between the fetus and the walls of the womb and birth canal. And the question is the touching of that a core element of what is necessary for there to have the status of a bechor? So, boy, Rava, karacho besiv mahu. If you were to cover the fetus while it's inside its mother with this material, the material, the fibrous substance that grows around the base of a palm tree, what would the law be? Would that be a separation or not? As Rashi tells us, mahu. It's take a look at the Rashi from the bottom of the narrow lines. It's 10 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Mao shetei chatzitza. Is this going to constitute a separation? V'amrinan, and we'll say kevan de lo naga barechem, since this fetus never touched the womb walls as it was coming out. Lo kaddish. It's not going to gain sanctity. Daharechem hu de mekadesh. That because it is those walls that are going to constitute that make it holy. Debidide tala rakmana. That's what matters, because again, a C-section doesn't work. A regular birth does. Well, come and buy Amos Kroko, and we're going to ask, well, when exactly was this body wrapped? When was the infant wrapped? And
I don't know. I can't understand. It's hard to picture such a scenario.
Yeah, well, imagine. Obviously, these animals have a larger canal. The person sticks their hands in and basically wraps the baby in some kind of container. There are some who will analogize this to birth with forceps and ask the same kinds of questions in connection with a human before, although I understand that that's actually not that is not as much as an issue, but in any event, that this can be relevant actually in even in our days. So betaliso mahu, what happens if this animal fetus is wrapped in a garment and then the baby is born? Bishil yaso mahu, if it's wrapped in its amniotic sac before it's born. 1 second, Bishil yaso orchehu. What do you mean wrapped in its amniotic sac? That's going to that's the way it is. That's the way it exists. How is that? That's the normal thing. No, ela b'shulya acheret mahu. What if you got another sack, meaning you stuck another sack in? So while the first ones might have been a chatzitza because they were something separate, but this is the normal thing. It's just from a different animal. This relates to the question of, if a Kohen has to be standing on the ground of the Beis Hamikdash in order to offer sacrifices, and they're barefoot. What if they step on the toes of somebody else? Is that considered a chatzitza, or is it not considered a chatzitza? It might be considered a chatzitza because there's something else separating it between its foot, the Kohen's foot and the floor, or maybe not. It's not a chatzitza because what is it that's separating? It's another foot, and that's the same object as arguably it's the same material as the foot itself. And so maybe, and often we will say that the thing itself cannot serve as a chatzitza for itself. So
well, here the placenta helps provide nutrition for the baby.
Yeah, so maybe so in this case, additional placenta was put in there essentially. So el b'shilya acheres mahu. So again, what would be the law if there was another placenta or another amniotic sac that was put in? So krachato va'achasato v'hotziato mahu. What if and Rashi notes that this language is feminine. So kracha. Rashi says, Isha biyadeha, that a woman with her hands, she envelops the fetus with her hands, v'hotzio, and now takes it out. V'hefsiko yadeha. I'm sorry, I should have said where there's Rashi. It's 4 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. So again, Isha biyadeha, that a woman wraps the fetus in with her hands, v'hotzio, and takes him out. V'hefsiko biyadeha. Beino levein harechem, and that her hands effectively separate the baby from the walls of the birth canal. So mi amrinan keven de orchehu. Do we say, well, that's just the way childbirth happens? Orchehu leleid es behema and behemta. That's the way she will have her children, these animal children, be born. So lav chatzitzu. And so as a result, that's not going to be considered a chatzitza. Or maybe we say that no, it is a chatzitza. So that's,
one would actually enter. One puts the hands in the vaginal canal to bring the baby out, essentially.
That's
so the
exactly
hands
right.
serve as the wrapping in this case.
Correct. That's exactly what this question is. So hekidami idin nafak derech reshe. Well, 1 second. When are all of these talking about? If the head came out first, petarte, we know that the fetus, that when the head comes out, that's already considered opening of the womb, and that's going to be considered birth, and therefore the animal is already a bechor. So Ella did nafak derek margalosav. No, so it's where the fetus emerged feet first. And so as a result, because the feet have come out, but it's not yet fully born, so now that you stick your hands in or do any of these other coverings, that's where we're going to say, have all of these questions. So belato chulda v'hotziato mahu. What if a weasel came in, ate kind of gross, ate the fetus, and then came out and spit it out? So it never went through the walls. Well, hotziato ha'apikte. But 1 second, if you're saying about the fetus drawing it out, it's removed it. So there's nothing to ask here. It's just like all of the questions. As Rashi tells us, ha'apikte kishahaya balua, when it had swallowed it, below naga barekam, and it never touched the walls of the birth canal, hainu kirakto. It's as if it was wrapped. So Ella, so let's clarify the question. Bilato, v'hotziato, v'achniasato, v'hekiato. No, it's a four-step process. First, it swallowed it. Then it took it out. So now it's outside the walls. V'hachnisato. Then it went back in and v'hekiato, and it spit it out. So as a result, the yatsa me'elav, and the fifth step is now the fetus emerges on its own. So again, the weasel came in, took it, brought it out, brought it back in, and now the birth happened on its own. Do we say that the initial birth inside the weasel, when the weasel came out of the animal, the mother animal, that it's going to be considered as if it's born? Or do we say no, when it came back inside and now comes out the normal way? Presumably not alive, but it comes out the normal way.
Not alive.
Well, actually, my guess is that it got to come out alive, because we're asking whether or not it's a bechor. Well, I guess it's whether a bechor. Would you have to, does it have the sanctity of a bechor such that even if it's dead, you would need to bury it and you would not be able to benefit from it? So another question, again, more and more far-fetched, but in any event, that's trying to push us into understanding what is the nature of childbirth. Hidbik shnei rachamim. We have two mothers, and we attach the two wombs to one another. V'yatsa mizev and nichnas lezeh. Mahu. If it goes out of one and goes into the other. So mahu. Didei pater. Do we say that it can open its own mother, the lav didei lo pater, but it can't open another animal? So the second animal, which never had a baby before, when it comes out of that animal, do we say that that's opening the birth canal or not? Odilma, the lav didei nami pater. Maybe it could even come out of its non-mother and still be considered a birth. So the Gemara leaves it all standing and lets it and says we don't know the answer to these questions.
Well, that effectively opened the canal of the second mother in reverse, because it breaks open the canal.
Correct. You're absolutely right that it opened, but we're going to assume that doesn't work. But certainly, but then the animal eventually comes out, and now the question is, does it? You're right that it could even be before this moment, but certainly when that infant comes out of the non-mother after it's been put in that non-mother, is that considered a birth such that it would no longer be subject to the laws? So that mother would no longer be subject to the laws of Bechor because it had not had a birth beforehand. Okay, so by Rav Acha. Rav Acha, now more questions. So Rav Acha asked the following: Niftachu kosle beis harechem. If the walls of the birth canal were opened wide, mahu, so that it never touched, so the birth never touched them. Avir rechem mekadesh. Is it just the airspace that sanctifies, or is it the ha'ika, and we have the airspace because it's going through it? Oh, Dilma Nagias Rechem Mekadsha. Or do we need the touching of it to that space in order for it to be Vahaleka? And here we don't have touching. So Boimar Bar Rav Ashi, Ne'ekru Kosle Beis Harechem Mahu. What if the walls of the birth canal were removed and torn away? So nekru, 1 second, if they're turned away, lisnu, well then they're not there, and therefore it's definitely not going to be, there's not going to be any sanctification. Ella nekru v'talule b'tzavare mahu. What if it was torn and then put on the fetus so that it's still touching the fetus? B'makoma makache, do the walls only sanctify the fetus when it goes in, when their walls are in the right place? Shaloba makoman lo makachi, but when they're in not the right place, they don't. Odilma shaloba makoman namikachi. Or do we say no? Even when they're in the not place, they also have the ability to sanctify. So Baimine Rabbi Yirmiyam and Rabbi Zera nigmemu kosle beis harechem mahu. What if the walls were peeled away? What's the law? So again, we're not going to answer all of these first questions. They're all left unsolved, but we are going to answer this last question. Amrale kanagat bevoid iboilan. You've touched on something, and maybe that's intended as a pun, that he references touch in the context of where touch is so relevant. But you've touched on a question that we've asked. So, Deboy Rabbi Zera, because Rabbi Zera to whom you're asking this question, he asked the following: Va'amrila boy mine Rabbi Zera mi Rabbi Yasi. Or, and some people say that it was Rabbi Zera who asked of Rabbi Yasi. Ome miruba al haparutz v'yatza derech parutz. If you have a majority of the wall that is um, um, that is there, and and part of it is missing, and it comes out through the gap, so it never touches the wall that is there. Or paritz maruba al haomed, or the gap is larger than what remains of the wall of the birth canal. The yatza derech omed, and even though what's the minority part is the walled part, that's where the animal the birth happens, so it does touch it, but it's only touching a minority, and it's only a minority of the whole thing, and so maybe we should follow the majority, and the majority is not there. So ad kan lui boile ela paras meruba ala omid. So clearly the question that was asked was only where where there was more missing than there was present. But the Ika Omed Ba'olam, but there was at least some amount that was there. Aval Nigmamu, if you had it completely missing, where it was fully peeled away, lo kami boile. That didn't, Rabbi Zera didn't even ask that question. And so as a result, that shows that that question is not a relevant question. And therefore, if it's completely missing, well, then it would certainly not be considered a childbirth, and the infant would not be, the baby animal would not be a bechor. Okay.
I don't know how it comes out. I mean, but the whole area is missing, so it comes out through another
skin,
opening?
The whole skin of that area is missing.
I understand. So it comes out through another opening, or
no, it comes out through that opening. It just has no the birth canal, the entire. It's hard to imagine, but imagine somebody cut out the.
Well, there are mucous membranes that are lining the vaginal canal. So they
correct. So all of those membranes were scraped out and removed. And so all of the entire membrane was removed. So there's no wall associated with that vaginal canal any longer. That's the situation that we actually do answer. And we say that in that situation, the animal would not be a bechor, because you need to have at least some of that animal, some of that vaginal canal wall being present in order for the birth to be considered a birth that creates kedusha for a bechor.
Hard to imagine the other questions that were asked. It's a little hard to conceptualize those, because during the normal birth process, contractions are necessary, and the muscular wall, the behind the mucosa, there's musculature in the vaginal wall, so that contributes to the contractions that enable the baby to exit from the mother. So it's hard to imagine if all this was stripped away, didn't touch anything. It's hard to imagine that the birth would proceed in a smooth fashion.
Well, presumably it does not proceed in a smooth fashion, which relates to some of the questions that we mentioned earlier. Meaning, what if you essentially reach your hand in and yank the fetus out? What would that would still all these laws would still apply. And so, especially if you're not using your hands to cover the entire thing, so it would potentially rub against it, and that would still be sufficient for a birth. But you're absolutely right. On some level, these are theoretical questions that potentially have unique applications, to the extent that we say childbirth of a human is like childbirth for an animal. But in any event, the bottom line is that you're absolutely right that it may not be, some of these questions may not actually be practical, that they could happen in the way that is described here. All right, behema shemes ubra betoch me'eha. What happens if the fetus dies inside the womb? Stillbirth, exactly. But and key here is it's still inside the mother. V'hoshid haroa es yado v'nagabo. And now the shepherd puts his hand in and touches that dead fetus. Maybe they're trying to see whether or not it's alive, and they determine that it's dead. Rashi tells us, l'toch me'eha, meaning that they're reaching their hand inside the mother's womb. So ben b'vehema tmeya, ben b'vehema tahora, tahor. According to the Tanakama, the person who touches that dead animal remains tahor. Even though if that dead animal were to come out, it would now be a nevela, and as a result would potentially convey tuma. It does not, and so as a result, you're still tahor. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, v'tameya tameh, v'tahora tahor. No, if it's a tameh animal, a non-kosher animal, then then the person who came in and puts his hand in is going to be tameh. If it's a tahor animal, the person is going to be tahor. Now note that tahor and tameh, with respect to the animal, really just means, is it kosher or is it not kosher? Is it a species that is kosher or not kosher? So the fact that it's tame, if it's a tame animal, is interesting, because it's not usually that those two topics, the tuma of the whether it actually conveys tuma, is not related to the fact that we call it a tame animal, meaning that it's not kosher. But in any event, for Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the two become connected, and we will see why now. So my time at the Tanakhama. What's the reasoning of the Tanakhama? Amar of Chisda Kal V'chomer. He is a Kal V'chomer. Im ho ila imo lahati roba achila. If the mother has the ability to make that fetus, even if it's not alive, make that fetus kosher to eat by shechting it while it's still in its womb, lo toil lo letuhure midi nevela, well then it should certainly enable the womb, the being in the womb should prevent it from becoming a nevela. So ashkechan behema tahora behema tamea minalan. All right, so fine. That works with respect to a tar animal, where the shechting of the mother could make the eating of the fetus that's inside her kosher, but that doesn't apply to non-kosher animals. So Amar Kra, we have a gzeira shava. V'chi yamos min habehema. If one of the animals is a pasuk, Vayikra Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Lamed Tet, V'chi Yamos Min HaBehema, if one of the animals shall die, Zo Behema Tmeya, that refers to a non-clean animal, to a non-kosher animal. Asher Hi Lachem La'achla, that you are going to be able to eat, Zo Behema Tahora, that's going to be a clean animal. Idgish Behema Tmeya, Le Behema Tahora. So as a result, we are going to understand this verse as connecting these two topics, Ma Behema Tahora Ubara Tahor, Af Behema Tmeya Ubra Tahor. So just as a fetus of a kosher animal, it remains tahor inside the womb, even if it's dead. So too, the same thing is true for the fetus inside a non-kosher animal. For Rabbi Yossi Aglili, my taima. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi Aglili? So I'm Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak offers the explanation number one. To Amar Kra v'chol holech al kapav v'chol hachaya haolechas. That the pasuk says, this is Vayikra Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Kav Zayin, that everyone that walks on its paws, kapav, among all living creatures that walk, we're going to see that if you touch the pasuk continues that if you touch the carcass, you're going to be tamei until the nightfall. So what is this teaching? Mahalche kapayim b'chaya tamesilach. Well, that shows that if in fact it would walk on the paws, it would be tamei. So as a result, that's going to be a dead fetus is going to be tamei. Well, in second though, elamei ata kalipim e para li tamei. But when second, if that's true, that anything that would walk on paws, meaning on a single foot without a split hoof, would be considered tamei inside the mother. What about if a cow has a deformed fetus inside her, and so as a result, it is joined hooves, and it's inside the cow, so then that should be tamei as well, to mahalche kapayim b'chayahu, because if it were to come out, it would walk on single hooves, and so it should be not kosher. No, mahalche kapayim b'mahalche arba. No, when would we say that the fetus of a non-kosher animal is going to be tamei? What's the rule? It's only if the mother animal also has only 4 hooves. And so as a result, where 4 hooves are within 4 hooves. So b'hai mahalche arba b'mahalche shmonahu. But this one, right, it has 4 hooves, but the mother is a cow with split hooves, and so as a result, it effectively has 8 hooves. So parabim e gamal lo titame. So all right. So what if it's a reverse kind of situation? Let's say a cow fetus is inside a camel and is dead. Do we say de mahalche shmona b'mahalche arbahu? Now we have a creature that would walk on eight hooves within a creature that would walk on four. So shouldn't that be and yet this would seem to say that anything within the unclean animal is a nevela, and yet this would say that there are eight hooves, so maybe it should be tahor. No,
We're
holik.
saying nevela or treifa?
No, nevela. We're talking about tuma. So it's a tuma of a nevela. So holik v'chol holik. No, well, the reason that we're going to say that even that animal is included, even though it has eight, even though the fetus has eight hooves, and therefore does not violate the rule that you just outlined of a kol holik al kapav, because it has to have only four hooves if it's going to be holik al kapav, and this deformed animal inside the camel has eight hooves, because it says the kol holik, it comes to include l'rabos para b'mei gamal. It comes to include the deformed cow that is inside the womb of a camel and has split hooves. All right, okay. Well, how about the following? Kiluta. Well, then, what if you have two deformed cows, one inside the other? So the deformed mother has joined hooves, even though it's a cow and it's a clean animal. And the animal inside it also has that same deformity. And so as a result, now that it has died, this should be tameh, because according to you, if it has four hooves, and this only has four hooves because the split hooves have been joined, and the mother has four hooves, and this one has a mother with the same deformity, and so as a result, it also has four hooves. So as a result, that should be tameh. And so yet you, Rabbi Yossi, said that this is going to be tahor because it is a kosher animal. It is from the species that is kosher, and so as
the
a
animal is
result,
not kosher. It says a deformed mother, right?
correct. It's a deformed mother, but it's from the species of cow. And so when you ask, while we may not be able to eat it because of the deformity, if you ask, is it a tahor animal or a tameh animal in terms of the species, it's considered a tahor animal because it's kosher, because it's from the cow family. And
So
so
is it a
as,
nevela or a tameh?
sorry.
That cow, now that it's deformed, the living cow, the mother. Do we
Yeah.
consider that nevela or
No,
tamea?
it's alive. It's not a nevela at all. The
Okay,
the infant inside it is the nevela, and
okay.
the person is reaching their hand in and touching that nevela inside the cow, and so and that cow also the fetus also has the same deformity, and so based on the reasoning that Rabbi Yossi Aglili has given us, we should now say that this cow should convey tuma because we have four paws within four paws. And so as a result, that's the definition that Rabbi Yitzchak gave us of why a tame animal, a non-kosher animal, its fetus, if it's deceased, will convey tuma even when it's inside it. So lahachi ahane kal v'chomer de Rav Chisda. No, that is the one that would teach us the kal v'chomer of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda would say that in that specific instance, if you were to shech the mother, right, that would be a valid shchita for the infant. And so as a result, similarly here, the mother can protect the infant, and even though it has the same deformity. So maskif la Rav
Wait a minute, you
Achada.
shech the mother, and but the mother is deformed. The mother has four instead of eight, right?
Correct, correct. Clearly, this would be according to the viewpoint that you can eat the mother animal, even with that deformity.
And then the baby would be
And the
also
baby
kosher.
therefore would be kosher because it was inside the mother when the mother was shechted, and
But
so
this
as a
baby was
result,
dead, right?
and the baby was dead. That's exactly right. And we know that you can eat the pieces of the baby, right? If you cut up the baby and leave it inside the mother and then shech the mother, we learned that in the original Mishnah of our
Right.
perek that is going to be kosher. So maskiv lo Rav Achadvai bar Ami. So Rav Achadvai asks, Chazer b'mei chazirta loli tamai. But 1 second, based on what you're saying, a pig which has split hooves, that is in the inside its mother, which also has split hooves, de mahalche shmona b'mahalche shmonahu, it should not be tamei. So chazir b'mei chazirta loli tamei de mahalche shmona b'mahalche shmonahu. It's 8 within 8. Ella Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Mehacha. So as a result, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, ignore what we said a few moments ago. That pasuk from Vayikra Perek Yud Aleph pasuk of Zion is not the basis. Rather, the Torah says in Vayikra Perek Hey pasuk Bet, Nefesh Asher Tiga B'chol Davar Tamei O Benivlas Chaya Tmeya O Benivlas Behema Tmeya O Benivlas Sheretz Tamei. Basically, it goes through this pasuk, parakeh pasuk bet, goes through all of these tamei animals and says that that's going to the person. If you touch the carcass, it's going to be tamei. But it was always an unclean animal. V'chi nivlas behema tameya mitama ubetahora lo mitama. But 1 second, the Gemara asks that pasuk, which only referenced tahor animals and didn't mention tamei animals. Doesn't that show that but we know that tahor animals, that again, that pasuk only mentioned tamei animals, didn't mention tahor animals. But we know that tahor animals that have a nevela are also going to convey tuma. So why did it only tell us about tamei animals? Ela ezeh ze uber. Rather, what it must thus be talking about, it's talking specifically about a fetus. And therefore, it's only when you have the fetus that it's going to say that we're making this distinction between a tamei animal and a tahor animal. Shebitameya tamei, ubitahora tahor. That pasuk highlights the fact that when it's a tamei animal, the fetus inside that's deceased is going to create tuma, but a tahora animal, the fetus inside, even if it's deceased, is not going to convey tuma. All right, so now that we've learned this lesson from Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak to Rabbi Yitzchak Lamali, what do I do with the fact that it seems like there was extra words in the pasuk that Rabbi Yitzchak taught? Well, Ilav the Rabbi Yitzchak, without the teaching of Rabbi Yitzchak, Hava Amina Kule Kede Rabbi, that everything is like the halacha of Rabbi, that Rabbi will say, that we will see in God willing tomorrow, Huda Asa, that everything is teaching like Rabbi. That what does Rabbi say? Rabbi is the one who says that so Kamash Malan, that we're not going to follow what Rabbi says. Now Rabbi is going to say that the terms Chaya and Behema are actually synonymous. And so as a result, when we say an unclean chaya or the carcass of an unclean behema, it's going to basically say that's a repetition, and therefore we need to learn something else from this pasuk. And so I might have thought that we should use that lesson. So based on Rabbi Yitzchak's lesson, we're going to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to use Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's lesson to teach us that the same thing applies to the carcass of any unclean fetus, and therefore, meaning if we would have only had Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, we might have said, oh, let's use Rebbe's teaching and say that therefore the connection between behema and chaya will also tell us, will also use the gzera shava between a behema tahora and a behema tameya, a chaya tahora and a chaya tameya, and all of them will have the same law. And so as a result, we need Rabbi Yitzchak's learning to tell us that we can use Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's teaching in order to say that, no, if it's an unclean, if it's a non-kosher fetus that's deceased, then it will convey tuma. And so as a result, we'll pause there and pick up, God willing, from that point, God willing, tomorrow with continuing on the discussion of this particular topic. So we didn't quite get as far as I had hoped, but the bottom line is we're going to see the concept of how we know that a behema and a chaya actually could include each other. But for that, you'll have to wait for tomorrow's daf.
We're talking about kosher, and in the beginning of the Mishnah, we use the word tamei to refer to kosher. Now we're saying tamei refers to tuma.
No, we're using it both ways.
Right.
That's what makes this so confusing.
Right.
100%, we're using it both ways. When we're talking about the person, we mean tameh, as in it conveys tuma. And when we're talking about the animal, especially the mother animal, then we're talking about then we're talking about whether or not it's kosher. And if we want, we could do this last Rashi. So ilav the Rabbi Yitzchak hava amina kule hai kral the Rabbi Asa. So if we take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi on Ayin Amabed. Damrin lekaman, because Rebbe is going to say on the next daf, ekra ani chaya behema lama nemra. Why do I once I have the word chaya? Why do I need to mention behema? And so as a result, the point is that we're going to learn something else from that pasuk. V'ubar tmeya de torn tepuk lan mahakesha deleil. And so as a result, without Rabbi Yitzchak, I would say don't learn use Rebbe's lesson in connection with the pasuk that we were just quoting in Perek Hey pasuk Bet of Vayikra, and use the Hekesh to tell us that the same law applies for a tamei animal and a tahor animal, and a kosher animal and a non-kosher animal. And so, as a result, the fact that we have Rabbi Yitzchak's statement is what allows us to know that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is able to also teach his lesson from that same pasuk that Rebbe is going to be using, and teach us that in fact, although when it only references unclean animals in that pasuk, what it is telling us is that in fact that it's referring to a fetus that has died with inside its mother, and only a fetus of a tamei animal is going to convey tuma, whereas a fetus of a tahor animal will not convey tuma. And so that is so again, we'll pick up, God willing,
that's Rav
from there
Yitzchak
tomorrow.
when he's using the pasuk about the animals tameim, the chazir, and so forth. That's Rav Yitzchak's, right? We had the second pasuk. The first pasuk seemed to talk about I forget which one, but the second pasuk.
Rav Yitzchak's pasuk is the pasuk that said v'chol holech al kapah b'chol hachaya haolechet. Right, so that it has to walk on paws. Right, that was the Rav Yitzchak's pasuk. And the problem with Rav Yitzchak's pasuk was, what about the pig? And
right.
So as a result, that's why we had to come to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's drasha. And so the bottom line is that Rav Yitzchak's drasha gets us going in the right direction, that allows us to then use Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's teaching, because Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's teaching is used by Rebbe for a different purpose. And so I might have thought we should only use that other verse for the purpose stated by Rebbe, that we will see, God willing, tomorrow, but and not for the reasoning of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, but based on the teaching of Rebbe Yitzchak. So that's why we're going to use Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's lesson as well.
Trying to find Rav Yitzchak's pasuk. That was
Rav Yitzchak's pasuk is the pasuk v'chol holech al kapah b'chol achaya haolechas. That is a perek Yud Aleph in Vayikra, pasuk Kav Zayin.
And did we have, if an animal, if there's the ubar is tamei, from a tamei animal, and that ubar, so then we say that ubar is tamei, right?
But no, that's Rabbi Yossi Aglili's position. The Tanakama's position is that if that ubar is within its mother, it's tahor still.
But if it's a tamei animal,
even if it's a tamei animal. That was our Mishnah. Take a look at the Mishnah. The Tanakama in our Mishnah says it doesn't make a difference whether it's a tamei animal or a tahor animal. The person who sticks their hand and touches that dead fetus is still tahor.
But wasn't there opinion that said that ubar
yes,
was
Rabbi
tamei?
Yossi Aglili says that's the machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi Aglili.
Okay, so the question I have now is, if, according to that opinion, the animal, the baby, well, I guess the one that says the baby is tamei.
Okay, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Uh-huh.
Okay, now this baby is dead. It's a stillbirth. So isn't that a nevela? So is this animal both tamei and nevela?
Well, that's why it would be tame. Meaning the reason that it's tame is because it's a nevela. The point is that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it's considered like a nevela even inside its mother, and that's why it will convey tuma.
It's Kaveh's Tuma because it's an Avela.
Correct. Correct.
But I thought there was we were saying that there's an opinion if the animal is tamei, the mother, but by definition is a pig, let's say, and
Yep.
that animal, the baby inside is tamei because it's a pig. So
Correct.
now that baby is dead. So that baby, so isn't that we said a dead animal is nevela? So is that
Well,
animal tamei and nevela?
it's a tame animal because it's not kosher,
Right.
but and it conveys tuma because it's a nevela, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's the
Well,
confusion that exists in the language of calling kosher animals. That's why I try to use kosher and non-kosher when I was talking about the nature of the species and whether it's and because we use tame to mean non-kosher and tahor to mean kosher without having any necessary tuma connotations, because a live pig is tahor in the sense that it does not convey tuma, right? Even though it's a tame animal, it does not convey tuma while it is alive. And so the discussion that we have is you now have this live mother pig with a dead fetus inside it, and you reached your hand in and touched the dead fetus. Does that convey tuma? According to the Tanakama, no, because we treat kosher animals, non-kosher animals, just like we treat kosher animals. And for a kosher animal, it's going to be tahor. So for a non-kosher animal, it will be tahor. And whereas Rabbi Yossi Aglili says no, when it comes to a kosher animal, fine. When it's inside its mother and it's dead, since it could become kosher because you slaughter the mother, it won't become tameh. It's not considered a nevela. But when it comes to a non-kosher animal, we're not going to say that. And the basis to not say that is the pasuk by Yikra Parakeh, pasuk Bet, that says that which lists all these non-kosher nevela situations and doesn't mention any kosher nevela situations. And so, what is the situation where you could have non-kosher animals with a nevela? Well, this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and so the Rabbi Yossi Aglili would say that that's referring to cases where you have a dead fetus inside a live non-kosher animal.
all right. That is, it gets a little bit confusing.
Oh, it's very confusing, 100%, especially because, again, some of the same terminology is used in two different ways. But bottom line is that the Tanakhama says the fetus is a dead fetus inside its mother is always tahor, is always not going to convey tuma, whereas Rabbi Yossi Aglili says if it's not a non-kosher animal, it will convey tuma. If it's a kosher animal, it will not. All right. We'll pick up, God willing, from there tomorrow. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.